Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Months the Earth Stood Still, videotaped inside of a live studio apartment. The show where I have my own quarantine-themed movie marathon of films that I own actual physical copies of while in lockdown. Tonight's episode is for The Birds, and this one definitely is a guilty pleasure for sure. Tonight I will be reviewing or talking about the made-for-TV film The Birds 2: Land's End, a Showtime original movie, which debuted in 1994, made-for-TV movie that came out 30 years after the original Hitchcock film. This story takes place on the East Coast, and right off the bat, there's already two things going against this film that bring it a couple of notches below in terms of comparing it to the original. One is the addition of music. Now the music is okay in some areas. It's all right, but there's a lot of like unnecessary suspenseful music, and many people one of the things about the original Hitchcock film was that it did not rely, there was no music at all. It didn't rely on a music score. In fact, Bernard Herrmann, who's Hitchcock's usual composer, would create electronic sound effects of birds to kind of, intensify the suspense. The sound effects of the birds was kind of like the underscore of the film. So this movie, has music, so that's one thing already going against it. Another thing that's going against it is that there's kind of an explanation as to why the birds are attacking. And I'll go over that in just a little bit. One of the peculiar things about this sequel is that, ironically, it's actually more faithful to the original Daphne du Maurier novel, The Birds. In that story, we focus on a family named the Hawkins who live on a farm in the English countryside, by the sea, and they quarantine themselves in their farmhouse while there's a global pandemic of bird attacks. And in this film, our main protagonists are the Hawkin family, and some of the children even have the same names as the characters in the original story. So it's kind of strange that they went back to the source material to, tell this new story. This film takes place on the East Coast. I believe it was shot in South Carolina or North Carolina, one of the Carolinas. It was a TV movie. And I remember years ago when I was a kid, going into my mom's work, she worked at the cable company at the time. And I remember seeing this huge poster for The Birds 2, and it was an awesome looking sepia toned, filled with dread, these ominous shots of crows. And I remember seeing that the director's name was Rick Rosenthal. Now, for those of you who don't know, Rick Rosenthal directed the original Halloween 2 back in 1981 with Jamie Lee Curtis and Halloween Resurrection. However, when this film aired on Showtime and was subsequently released on home video, I noticed that the director's name was Alan Smithee. And even as a kid, I'm thinking, wait a minute, what's going on here? Years later, I found out that within the entertainment industry, Alan Smithee is a pseudonym for anyone that wants to have their name removed from a film project. You could look up the name Alan Smithee on IMDb, and it's miles of credits. And this is no exception. Rick Rosenthal was embarrassed with the final product that he had his name removed and replaced with Alan Smithee. So, there you have it. We do have some kind of names that are familiar with like working in this film. Bruce Surtees, who was a DP on some of the Psycho sequels, worked on this film. Ken and Jim Wheat, who did the teleplay, worked on some of the later Elm Street sequels. And yeah, like I said, this film is actually a little more faithful to the original story. Um, our two protagonists are played by Brad Johnson from the Left Behind series and Chelsea Field, who some of you may recognize from Masters of the Universe and The Last Boy Scout. And it's kind of funny because the two of them look more like Superman and Lois Lane with two blonde kids as their children. I always thought it was kind of funny. The film, being that this is a made-for-TV movie on a budget, there's the special effects range from decent to really bad. There's an over-reliance on some really bad opticals, and some of those opticals, the birds show up as kind of disproportionate to the scale of the foreground. The size and scale don't really match up that well. And there's also an over-reliance of the use of pigeons. And again, being it's a TV movie, they're on a budget. Pigeons are more easily trainable. So I can see why they did that. But you still have the usual seagulls and crows and sparrows, and they even threw in a few, hawks and birds of prey in there too. This story is pretty pedestrian. It goes into the usual trope of the protagonist trying to convince the city officials to deal with the problem, and right off the bat, the officials ignore the plights of the protagonists. And it's something that you see in all of these nature runs amok kind of films, and this film is no exception. I mean, the city officials in this movie are straight out of a Jaws sequel. The mayor is so dismissive immediately. It's comical. And one of the side characters, who's the owner of a restaurant / bar, one of the owners of the bar in this film happens to be Muse Watson, who would later end up being the killer Ben Willis in the I Know What You Did Last Summer series. Muse Watson plays the owner of the Tides restaurant. And that's another thing that bugs me about this film, is that there's some fan service in this film that is very questionable. They advertise the fact that Tippi Hedren has a small cameo in this film as a shopkeeper, yet she's playing a different character that is not in any way related to the character that she played in the original Hitchcock film, but yet this movie still references the events in the original Hitchcock film. Another thing that I thought was kind of weird too is that the name of the restaurant is the Tides, and this film takes place on the East Coast, and the Tides was also the name of the restaurant too in the original Hitchcock movie of The Birds. And it's some weird fan service that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but whatever. There's Tippi Hedren right there. It's like I said, it's a guilty pleasure. The dialogue, when it comes to the personal lives of the characters that don't have anything to do with the birds, is so comical. I was watching this with a friend, and we were just like rolling our eyes at how cheesy it is. The difference between the dialogue of the original Hitchcock film when it came to the personal lives of the characters was that it was intentionally funny. The characters were intentionally doing something stupid or funny that was, kind of part of their character. Whereas the subplot of a photographer trying to hit on the guy's wife, that exchange is unintentionally funny, that it sounds like something out of a really bad soap opera. It's just so corny. And but like I said, there's some sequences that work. The main attack on the town by the birds towards the end of the movie is, for a TV movie, it's kind of well executed. And I remember my brother and I, when we were kids, when this movie aired, we thought that it was the best movie in the world because that main attack sequence was pretty action packed. And so years go by, you get older, you recognize all the things that don't work and work. Yeah, and towards the end of the movie, our main protagonists, the Hawken family, they quarantine themselves in their beach house on Land's End from the revolt of the birds. And the other thing that really, really bugs me about this movie, and this is kind of a spoiler warning. There's a lot of spoilers. Spoiler alert. The ending of this movie is so abrupt. I remember reading in a film guidebook that a critic said that the movie seemed like they ran out of film in the camera. That's how abrupt the ending is. I mean, without giving too much away, we kind of just leave our protagonists in the area that they are with no sign of any rescue, nothing. The film just kind of ends. That is about it. I would definitely check this out as a guilty pleasure because it's got a lot of corny moments and it's got some gory moments as well too, which kind of lives up to its predecessor in that regard. And I want to thank my horror movie producer friend Patrick Kuznati for getting me this film because as of this moment, The Birds 2 is not available on DVD. It's only available on VHS, and he was able to burn a copy for me onto DVD. So thank you, Pat. And stay tuned. I will be going over M. Night Shyamalan's Signs in the next episode. So until then, stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.